Hi, my name is Darren Hartman and I am the co-owner and senior colorist of Alchemic Color based in Portland, Oregon. I color grade commercials, feature films, short films, music videos, documentaries, and all types of projects. I also offer Dailies workflow services. When I first tried out Look Designer and ColourLab AI, I immediately integrated them into my normal workflow processes. They increase the speed at which I can work, but also greatly increases the quality of the work that I produce. It lets me focus more on the creative side of color grading instead of wasting time on the technical side of things. I do work as a cinematographer as well, and this past summer I shot More Than Only, the short film series. It's a continuation of an LGBT feature film of the same name, and it's being distributed as a web series on YouTube. The main challenge of the project was the fact that we're shooting amidst the pandemic. We had a skeleton crew of only a few people, and we're also being mindful of COVID set protocols. We had a lot of content to shoot in a really short amount of time, and there was days that I knew I was going to have to be my own gaffer as well as my own first AC. With limited resources at hand, I shot some test footage in my living room and used Look Designer to create a show LUT that I used for the production. It had to work under various shooting conditions required by the series, but also had to be something that I had confidence in while I was shooting on set. I want to go over the process I used to create the look of the show, but also how Look Designer and ColourLab AI helped the production overall. To create a show LUT, I'll bring Look Designer onto a node, and then I set my input profile based on the camera that I shot with. In this case, it was the Blackmagic Pocket 4K cinema camera, so I set it to BMD Generation 4. I want to export a LUT that could be used in the camera for monitoring, so I keep the output profile as Rec 709. Then I choose the negative stock I want to emulate. In this case, it was 5219. It's a versatile, high-speed stock, still used today. I shot with it in the past and really love working with it. Then I choose my print stock and my contrast, and I set them to 2383 as my film print emulation. Then I bring the contrast intensity and the print intensity usually a little bit below halfway to taste, just so it's not too extreme. Then I'll bring down the saturation as well to balance it out. The reds were looking a little bit too much for me, and that's kind of alright right there for me. After that, I play with the Subtractive Color, which is the complete game changer for me in terms of creating looks. I start off with cyan, I push a little bit in, and you'll see how the shadows get that nice blue, but also gets a lot of richness that I really like. After that, I push in some yellow to counter it. Just a tiny bit. And then magenta just to get a little bit more back into the skin tones. And then you could click on bypass off and on so you can see the difference. And it's not a huge change, but I really, really like what it did to the shadows for me there. Even just a little bit, you'll feel everything kind of just fall into place. And if you really want to push it, you'll notice that the more you push in CMY, you're losing exposure just based on how Subtractive Color works. So to counter that, you could use the push-pull as sort of an offset to get back some of that exposure that you lost. I'm kind of fine with how that is. And then if you want to, I also like using the temperature control if I feel like something's not cool enough or not warm enough. I'll usually do it in increments of 250 at a time. I really like it compared to Resolve's temperature control. It just feels better to me. But again, I'm kind of fine with this warm glow that the image has right now. That's kind of the look that I wanted for this series. And then once I'm feeling good about everything, I'll then export it as a 33 cube LUT. And I'll save that to wherever I need it to be and put it in my camera and go off shooting happily. I'll also export it as a 65 cube LUT, and this is what I would use in Resolve, in ColourLab AI, or if I was handing it off to someone else to work with as well. And there's a ton more options and combinations to use within Look Designer that I didn't even scratch the surface of. But at this point, I would use my LUT to shoot on set, and then once I'm ingesting footage, I would bring it into ColourLab to start balancing it out. So I have a short sequence from the series conformed in Resolve that I'm ready to bring into ColourLab. So I open up ColourLab and click on Resolve Import to bring in my timeline, and it reads the files as Blackmagic Generation 4 automatically, and it also does the output transform the Rec 709 for me as well. So now I want to apply the show LUT that I created earlier in Look Designer, and I already imported it, but you can do so by clicking Import LUTs, find where the file is located, and then put the input and output transforms for the LUT. I already did that, so I'll cancel that, and then I'll click on the LUT to apply it to the shot. That also set this clip as my reference, so from here on out, unless I change it, ColourLab is going to match everything in the scene to this clip. So I click on Apply to Scene so that the LUT is on all the clips now. So at this point, I may feel like I want to make some changes to the scene. Maybe I don't want it to be this warm, so I could push a little coolness into the gamma and into the lift, and maybe also take a couple points of yellow out of the printer lights. So if I'm feeling this is how I want this scene to look now, and since this is my reference frame, I can type A, and ColourLab is going to automatically match all the other clips in this scene to my reference. And once it's done, I'll go through and double check to see how well it did. This shot of the sink isn't quite there, but ColourLab makes multiple profiles of matches that you could choose from. And I'll just cycle through them, and I'll find the one that I feel like is the closest, and this one's feeling pretty much there. And maybe I'll bring the gamma down a tiny bit more, and just add a little more contrast to it. And overall, that's feeling pretty alright to me at the moment. I could bring it into Resolve into further tweaking if I want. Usually I'll go through all the clips here within ColourLab and do those adjustments before bringing it into Resolve, because usually I find that I can match an entire scene like this in a matter of seconds with very little effort. And once I'm done doing that work, I click on Resolve Export, and it will start exporting the CDLs and LUTs onto the clips on my Resolve timeline. You can also bring a DRX file from Resolve with a custom node tree and tell ColourLab which numbered nodes you want the CDL and the LUT to be applied to, which is a really awesome feature if you work exclusively with a custom node tree. Once that is done, it will tell you when it's finished, and you hit continue. Another thing you could do is you could change the output color before you export to Resolve, and then all of your LUTs are gonna have this output color as the output transform. So I usually like to work in Alexa Y Gamut, so I'll set that as my output color, and then export to Resolve. And then I can set an ODT on my timeline level that does whatever transform I need based on my deliverable. So now we'll move back over to Resolve with the work that we just did. So now I'm back in Resolve after exporting my CDLs and LUT from ColourLab, and you can see that it also exported my custom node tree that I like to work with. I'd also quickly note that things may look a little bit different just because I'm screen capturing from different displays, but I digress. Next, what I like to do is add some texture to my image, and the way that I do that is by using GrainLab, which is also made by ColourLab AI alongside Look Designer. And I add GrainLab to everything that I do. I absolutely love this plugin. I'm a huge film grain nerd, so it goes on everything that I do. You just apply it to a node, select your camera input profile, and then you choose which film grain you want to emulate, and then you could adjust the intensity of the film grain using these sliders. The spark kind of adjusts how much it affects the highlights. The body is kind of the size of the film grain, and then the base intensity is sort of like a blend. So I'll just leave it at full blast and full screen it and turn it off and on so you can see what it does to the image and what it adds to it. I wanted the series to be gritty, and I feel like this film grain added on top of the image really helps emphasize that. There's also a few scenes in the series where we have flashbacks that show what triggered the main character to start going through this mental anguish. And for those scenes, I chose to use the 16mm film grain, and you can see how much more chunky it is. And I felt like that really helped emphasize those story moments better than the 35mm grain. I also want to point out that I place GrainLab on my group pre-clip level. I always have it placed after wherever I have my noise reduction. I like placing on the group pre-clip level so that all the adjustments made after GrainLab, it changes up how the grain is from shot to shot, and I feel like that's more like how shooting actual negative stock was like. You can also place it on the timeline level before your ODT if you're using that method of color management. I would also note that it's not the best idea to place a node of GrainLab on each individual clip just because of the amount of processing power it takes to generate the grain. So usually on a group pre-clip, post-clip, or timeline level are usually the best places to use it. So I wanted to show another way that I've been utilizing Look Designer in my workflow, where I'm kind of emulating how films used to be shot and distributed on film. So instead of doing my output transform the Rec 709 here, instead I'm going to go to Alexa Y Gamut, and to note, everything in Look Designer and ColourLab works in Alexa Y Gamut under the hood. So if I choose select camera with no input, I am technically in RE Log C. And another thing to note is that in Resolve 17, you can now decode BRAW directly into Alexa Y Gamut Log C. So that is a method I've been using when working with Blackmagic RAW footage. So with that all set, now I'm gonna remove my 2383 print stock emulations, and instead I'm gonna apply it to my ODT that is now doing my RE-Log-C to Rec 709 conversion. And this way, everything before this, I am now working completely in Alexa Y Gamut. So turn that on, and in a way, I'm treating like this is now my film print stock, which is how films used to be distributed to theaters. And I could adjust it to however I want. And then I could also include this post-processing, which gives you the options of FPE and ENR. If you increase the intensity, you can see how it manipulates the colors to have a more realistic film-like response to it. So I usually like to enable this and put it just around halfway. ENR is bleach bypass, so if you want more of that desaturated silvery look to the image, you can use that as well. And from here, depending on the project and what I'm doing, I might also do a little subtractive color adjustments here as well, just to give a little bit more flavor to the kind of like a custom print stock that I'm making myself. So as I've mentioned before, Look Designer gives you an incredible amount of options and tools to play with. You can experiment with it on multiple nodes using different negative stocks and print stocks blended together and creating looks that were never possible using traditional film processing techniques. So it's a really great tool to experiment with and create looks for projects. I've used Look Designer, GrainLab, and ColourLab AI on every project that I've done in the past year, and they've definitely increased the speed that I work, but also the quality of the work that I've been able to produce. And I think they were completely integral to helping increase the overall production quality of the More Than Only short film series. It's a project that I'm honored to be a part of, and especially for the LGBT community. It's premiering on YouTube February 20th. I hope that you can check it out and that you enjoy it, and thank you very much.